So I've never been much of a film buff, but when I was younger, I got invited into this film group, and they introduced me to this whole world of like these foreign films and films I'd never heard of, some good, some terrible. I eventually lost interest, had to jump ship, but before I did, I was introduced to Andrei Tarkovsky. Not sure if I'm saying his name right, but his cinematic masterpiece called Stalker. Some of you have heard me share about this before. Stalker isn't some action flick like it sounds like it should be. It's actually a 1979 Russian film classic, and it's set in this bizarre dystopian kind of post-apocalyptic world. The beginning of the film, everything's in sepia tones, and as the plot unfolds, we discover that there's these three men. And they go by the name of Writer, Professor, and Stalker. Stalker is like the guide for them. And they're headed into this area just called Zone. And the reason they have to go into the zone is because in the zone, where it's illegal to go, they have to go, though, because there is the room. And in the room, when you get there, the room, what happens is whoever enters into the room, they will get what they most deeply desire in life. Not what they think they desire the most, not what they tell other people they want the most, but their deepest desires will be fulfilled. And as you follow these three through this long journey, and then finally they get into the zone, and everything goes from sepia tone to color, and they finally make it through this long journey to the room. But right then, Stalker then has guided them this whole way. Right then, as they face the room, there's this big door standing in front of them. Suddenly, Professor and the writer freeze. Suddenly, you can see it on their faces. They're not so sure they want to go through that door. Suddenly, they aren't so sure they want to see what's on the other side of the door. Suddenly, they aren't so sure that they're willing to face their own desires. And the whole film leads you to this point to ask you, do you know what you most deeply desire in life? If you were to open up that door, what will you find on the other side? Not what you think you desire, not what you tell other people you desire, but what you most deeply desire in life. Do you know? And do you even want to know? So, our lives are driven by desire. Whether it's like animal desires like hunger, thirst, sex, protecting yourself, or those deeper desires like those complex desires, those deeply human desires for autonomy and mastery and beauty and relationship and acceptance. From our first breath to our last breath, everything we do is driven and shaped and formed by desire. Take away desire and you'll pretty much stop doing anything. Like, desire drives us. In the words of Emily Dickinson, the heart wants what it wants, or else it does not care. Like, you are listening to this message right now because you want something. Now, I don't know what you want. Maybe you want to learn something. Maybe you want to be entertained. Maybe you want to know Jesus better. Maybe you just need something to help put you to sleep. I don't know what you want, but I do know that you want something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this right now. Everything we do is preceded by desire. Every good thing and every bad thing. Every well thought out plan and every knee-jerk reaction. Everything is preceded by desire. And this is not just the stuff of like Russian art films and psychologists. This is the stuff of life. This is the stuff of Scripture. This is the stuff of life with God. So if you go through the 10 Commandments, what's the 10th commandment? Thou shalt not covet. God says, be so careful about what you desire, what you long for, what you want. What's the difference between someone who has a life that is close with God or someone who is far away from God? The Apostle Paul puts it this way in Galatians 5:17. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit desires what is contrary to the flesh. That behind everything I do, in every word I speak, under every choice that I make, lay a desire that shapes me, propels me, forms my character, in some sense tells the story of my life. In some sense, if we could read our desires, if we could see them, they speak something about me. They lead my decisions about who I am, about who I'm becoming. They say something deep about me, and yours say something deep about you. And yet, what makes this whole thing so mysterious is that, like writer and professor in that movie, we often don't even know what we want. Even if we're quite sure that we know what we want, we don't know why we want it often. In the words of Pascal, that great French mathematician genius, he says it this way: the heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of. Or maybe more to the point for where we're headed today, in the Proverbs, Solomon, great King Solomon, in his wisdom, says it this way: the intentions of a person's heart are deep waters. They are so deep, like you can't see beneath the surface. You can just see the top. But one who has insight draws them out. That it takes someone with discernment and wisdom to be able to draw out that depth underneath that hiddenness. The prophet Jeremiah, he's a little bit more cynical on the whole thing. He says it this way in Jeremiah 17:9. He says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? That our heart, your heart, my heart is an incurable liar. If we're not so careful, we will be deceived. We will think we want one thing when really there's a different desire underneath drawing us out. Who can really know what's going on in there? So a big part of my story is that for the first, decades of my life, I kind of had a who cares attitude about this whole what's happening below the surface, this whole inner world of the heart thing. I was one of those guys who's like, hey, I'm happy for you. I'm so glad you're going to therapists and exploring all your deep feelings and stuff, but I got stuff to do. And then about 5 years ago, when I was in a particularly busy season of life, I went to bed one evening, and when I woke up the next morning, I couldn't move. I had shooting pains in my legs, and it felt like this massive weight was pressing down on my chest and on my legs, literally holding me to the bed. And I went to the doctor and got checked out and heard the worst news ever, that there was nothing wrong with me. And I was like, oh no, if it's not physical, this means I might have to go to one of those therapists and sit around and talk about how I feel. Now, 5 years later, I'm probably on the other end of the spectrum. I personally think everyone should go to a Christian psychologist or therapist and be psychoanalyzed. Seriously, it is so freeing. It is so helpful. It is so good. It is so healthy. If there's one thing that I've learned now in my 20 plus years of pastoral ministry experience, is that everybody is more broken than you can imagine. Everybody. But not everybody is aware of their brokenness. We need help. We need help figuring out our own hearts. And more basic than all of this, we need God to do something in our hearts. And that's what I want to talk about today. That's what we're going to explore today. When we search the scriptures, this promise comes up again and again that if we follow Jesus, if we trust him, if we love God, he promises to give us a new heart. He promises to deal with those things that are under the surface, that no one else, you might even not even know about yourself. He promises to dig into that. Not just fix us up on the outside, not just pretty us up, not just make us look good from the outside, but actually reach into our heart and change us. There's two famous passages that I often quote. Let me read them specifically. Ezekiel 36:26 and following says, God promising, God speaking here, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. I will do it, God says, over and over. I will give you a new spirit. I will give you a new heart. This is the promise for us. Anyone who follows Jesus, this is what's called the new covenant, the new relationship with God in Jesus Christ. This is what he promises. Jeremiah says it in slightly different words. Again, God speaking. This is the covenant, the relationship with God. This is what a relationship with God through Jesus looks like. I will make with these people, the people of Israel, after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. That the very law of God, the laws that say love God, love others, will be written on our hearts. So this month we are exploring this theme of new life that's promised in the scriptures. Last week we celebrated baptism, which is the symbol, the ceremony that marks this new life. That when someone goes down into the water, the old you is gone. And when you come up out of the water, the new you, the you that is in Jesus Christ, lives by faith, that knows God, that lives with a new purpose, new citizenship, new identity, new family, that you now lives. This week, we're going to look kind of under the surface, though, in our hearts. Jesus is not content with leading us just on some external journey. He's not just leading us to go to church and be good people and go on mission and serve our families and serve our community and serve our world. He is calling us to do all those things. But it's more than that. He's also inviting us to an inner journey. He isn't content with cleaning up the externals of your life or changing your behavior. He wants your heart. He wants your heart. So the question we're going to look at today is this: how do we experience this promised transformation of our hearts? How do we receive this new heart that is promised to those who follow Jesus? How do we, who barely know our own hearts, how do we experience an inner renewal that changes our desires, that grows our love for God and others, that fills our lives with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, self-control? Our text for today is Jeremiah chapter 17. Jeremiah 17. Let me set the stage. If you have a text, I'd encourage you to follow along. Jeremiah 17. Jeremiah is a prophet. He lived around 700 AD, about 600 AD, about 600 years before Jesus. At the time when Jeremiah was writing, God's people weren't living like God's people. They were obsessed with getting rich. The poor and the oppressed, they couldn't find any protection or justice. The whole culture was terribly violent. The religious leaders were just as greedy and immoral as the leaders in business. And the very same people who claimed to worship God also worshiped the gods of sex and money. It was a lot like today. So we're going to pick it up, Jeremiah chapter 17. He's writing a prophecy. This is a message from God to the people of Judah. That is in southern Israel, where the city of Jerusalem is located to this day. So Jeremiah chapter 17, starting in verse 1, God, speaking through the prophet, says this: Judah's sin is engraved with an iron tool, inscribed with a flint point, on the tablet of their hearts and on the horns of their altars. So follow this. When God's people entered into a relationship with him, a covenant with him, what we call a covenant, he called them out from Egypt, out of slavery. He called them to this place called Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, he held what we call a covenant ceremony, similar to what we would do in a wedding. He said, I will be your God and you will be my people. And then he took these two tablets, and God himself wrote on those two tablets his law. We call them the Ten Commandments. The first tablet is all about what life with God is supposed to look like. It's supposed to drive our love for God, that we are to love him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's what the first tablet of the law, so the first few commandments there. And then the second tablet of the law is all about how to love your neighbor. Like you shouldn't kill them, and you shouldn't commit adultery, and you shouldn't steal from them. So here, Jeremiah is saying, loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. That's what's written on the tablets that are supposed to be written on your heart. But God says, I've read your hearts, and that's not what's written on them. That the people of Judah have allowed something else to be engraved upon their hearts. The same way that you take an iron tool to carve something into a stone tablet, God says, there's something written on your hearts and I didn't write it. Instead, sin has rewritten the message on your hearts. It's rewritten the script of your lives. Sin has reshaped your deepest desires. Like the story that you tell yourself, the story that you think you're living right now. Follow this. When he says sin, Judah's sin is engraved with an iron tool. Sin just means apart from God. So it doesn't necessarily mean morally offensive. We might not even think of sin as bad in our culture. The culture at the time might actually applaud it as good. It just means apart from God. That they've written the story of their lives and it's excluded God. They've written the story of their lives on their heart, the thing that drives them, their deepest desires, and God's no longer part of it. That's what it says. But this new script is written on their hearts, and it says, on the horns of the altar. The altar is a place of worship, and the horns were the corners there. What they're saying is that God says, well, I've seen the script in your life. I've seen it not just in your desires, but I've seen it in your worship. I've seen it in what you really worship. Seen it in the ways you praise and glorify and treat things as important in your lives. That the message of their hearts, the subtext beneath what they really worship, what they really want, what their deepest desires are. I've read that subtext, and God says, I didn't write that message. So for me personally, I've been driven like my whole life. Like since I was really young, like my parents are going to be in town this weekend, you can ask them. Since I was really young, it just always felt like there was a switch inside of me that got stuck in the on position. Like I just had trouble resting. I always felt the need to be busy, productive, achieve something. Like I would go for a run and I couldn't just enjoy the run. I felt like I had to beat my time from last week. Or we'd go to the beach for the day, and I couldn't just enjoy the beach. I felt like I had to listen to 5 podcasts and construct an award-winning sand sculpture or something. Just something in me was driven to always achieve. And for years, I chalked it up as personality, like how I was hardwired or whatever. But then, through a series of crashes, burns, self-discoveries, therapy sessions, I came to realize that it's not just how I am. That my drivenness is not just how God created me, but my drivenness is how I respond, how I have responded to the pain, the hurt, the insecurity in my life. I came to realize that underneath all my achievements and drive, there's a message, there's a script that I've been telling myself for years, a script that's been written on my heart for as long as I can remember. And the message is this: you will never, ever be good enough. That's what's been driving me to achieve, to go, to never rest, to never let down for so long. And once this message was exposed, once I saw it for what it is, it was immediately apparent. God didn't write that. God didn't write that. We all have messages written on our hearts. We all have something, a story, lines that either we wrote or someone else wrote, that sin writes on our hearts, that drives what we do and how we act and how we respond and what comes out a lot of times is personality. Do you know what yours is? Do you know what's written on your heart? Do you know how it got there? I have a friend, Dave Wheatus. He's spoke at GVF a year ago. He's a counselor, and he has this helpful thing. He says, one of the things you should pay attention to is anytime you say to yourself or you say out loud, I will never. So I will never be embarrassed like that again. I will never be outworked. I will never trust that person again. I will never let my kids or my spouse or my job down. I will never feel like that again. Dave says anytime you use that I will never language, he suggests, and I think he's on to something here, that these types of statements reveal something deep about the script written on our hearts, about the things that we feel we have to control, about what we really worship in life. But maybe you're like me. Maybe you can't just find it going along. Maybe it's going to take something a bit more drastic in your life to discover what the script is in your life. Speaking of drastic, look at verse 2. Even their children remember their altars and Asherah poles beside the spreading trees and on the high hills. And when you hear this, you don't have to understand all the ancient context to appreciate what's being said here. He's saying if you don't deal what's going on in your heart, if you can't see the lies misshaping your life, then these same messages that are written on your heart are going to shape the lives of your children. the shame that you never dealt with, the anger issues, the secret addictions, the unforgiveness, whatever your thing is, until you've dealt with that, if you don't deal with that, you're going to pass it right on to your kids. So the people of Judah had worshipped the gods of sex and money. That's the Asherah pole reference there. And their kids remember these gods. So we're not talking, when it says remember here, it's not just talking about recall, like, oh yeah, I remember that. This is a very Hebrew way of saying it was fixed in their heart and their minds. So they remembered these gods the way a child whose dad leaves when they're young and never comes back. The way that they will remember that important people in their life might abandon them. If we don't deal what's going on in our hearts, our kids will remember. Skipping down to verse 5, God then gives us an image to consider this heart work. And this is where I want to land and really plant today. Verse 5, this is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. That person will be like a bush. It's the same word for a tree, but small tree. In the wastelands. They will not see prosperity when it comes. They will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. So in the southeast region of Judah, there's this vast wasteland. It's if you go to Jerusalem today, you go up to the east side, like the Palestinian side, and you look out, you can literally see it. It looks like Death Valley. I mean, it's just shocking. Parched, desert, terrible, barren. God says, the person whose heart turns away from me, the person who trusts in self, the person who puts their hope in what they can control and what they can achieve in the flesh, in their career, in the government, in their family, in anything apart from God, they're going to be like a bush in that wasteland. They're going to be isolated, parched, fruitless, cursed. Now, some of you are saying right now, but didn't I just hear last week that Jeff Bezos, as part of his celebration of his retirement, he's going to fly to outer space? And he owns doesn't he own like a $100 million yacht? Like, that doesn't sound so bad. I'm pretty sure that Jeff Bezos draws his strength from mere flesh, and it's gone pretty well from him. So let me be clear here. What we're talking about, when God looks at this tree, he says, the person who trusts in mere flesh, who trusts in themselves, who trusts in this world, they are like that tree in the desert. This is God's perspective. This might not be ours. The prophet Jeremiah is painting a picture for us to allow us to see how God sees that person, not how our world sees that person. And a lot of times those two things clash. At the beginning of the book of Revelation, which is an apocalyptic book, it's a book in which it pulls back the veil and allows us to see things the way God sees them. In the beginning of the book of Revelation, Jesus writes 7 letters to 7 churches. And in his letter to the church at Laodicea, he says this, and this is really like a helpful image of the difference between how we see things and God sees things. He says, you church of Laodicea, you say, I am rich, I've grown wealthy, and I need nothing. Like, you look at your life and say, I'm so successful, and I'm good looking, and I'm healthy, and things are good. I must be blessed by God. But Jesus, he sees things a little differently. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you, I advise you to buy from me gold refined by the fire so that you may become rich. You think you're rich, you're not. White garments so that you may be clothed and your shameful nakedness not exposed. And salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see that you are blinded by worldly success. You're blinded by your wealth and you don't realize how you really look in God's eyes. You see, there's a poverty that has nothing to do with how much money you have. No amount of money can give you life with God. No amount of success can make you truly happy. No amount of education can fill your heart with gratitude. No pleasure can fully satisfy. No experience, not even flying to outer space and owning a $100 million yacht, can fill the void in your heart. No marriage, no job, no friendship, no number of followers can truly fulfill you. If you have any questions about this, read the book of Ecclesiastes. If you trust in these things, if you trust in this world, if you trust in your strength, if you trust in your ingenuity, if you trust in this world to satisfy your deepest desires, you will become like a bush planted in a wasteland, isolated, parched, and fruitless. Verse 7. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in the year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. So do you get the picture here? Two trees. The one tree is rooted in self, and it is barren, it is isolated, it is fruitless. It is rooted in humanity, in what she can do and achieve and own and control. She seeks to satisfy her deepest desires in what this world can give her. The script written on the tablet of her heart does not include God, but there's a second tree that is rooted in the Lord. And this tree is planted by streams of water, and it will not fail to bear fruit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, self-control. The second tree, she is rooted in the Lord. Confidence comes from Him. She looks to God to satisfy her deepest desires, to give her what she can never get on her own. And the script of her heart is not written by this world. It's written by God Himself. Now I want you to notice, though, if you look back in the text, this does not mean that life is easy. It says when the heat comes, not if, but when it comes. It says in the year of drought, the drought is coming. That trusting in the Lord does not mean your life is easy. You will still face seasons of heat and drought, dry times. Both trees will see seasons of rain and drought. The sun will shine and the rain will fall on both the righteous and the unrighteous. But there is a difference. The first tree is rooted in things that will fail. I'm not saying they might fail. I'm saying they will fail. With enough time, everything in this world will fail you. There will come a time when you will no longer be able to do what you're able to do. You will no longer be able to do your career. There will come a time when your family members will die. No matter how much you love them, no matter how well you take care of them, they will die. There will come a time when your house will no longer stand, when the American government will fail, when your friends will no longer be there for you, when your health will fail, and you will die. This world in its present form is passing away. If you've rooted your life, your deepest desires in these things, they will dry up and you will find yourself in this life or in the next, isolated, parched, and fruitless. But God, He will never fail. He will never dry up. He will never leave you or forsake you. And even through death, He promises resurrection. He promises an eternal renewal, and He promises life everlasting. That's the difference. Verse 9 then points us back to our hearts and how the script written on the tablets of our hearts shapes what kind of tree we become. Verse 9 reads like this: "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" Like, you can think you're rooted in the Lord and actually be rooted in self. You can deceive yourself. If you're not careful, you can live your whole life and never really know what's driving you, never really know where your desires are headed. Think that you really want one thing and really be living your whole life out of false desires, out of a false script. But we're not hopeless. We might not know our hearts. Jeremiah asks here, who can understand it? But then he answers it. In verse 10, the Lord answers, "I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind, to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve." God says, you might not be qualified to judge your own heart, and you're certainly not qualified to judge other people's hearts, but I am. And if we invite Him to speak into our lives, He will. He will reveal our hearts. He knows our hearts better than we know it ourselves. He will write a new script on our hearts, one that gives us confidence in His love, one that can't be ruined or lost or overturned by hardship, one that does not allow us to wither in the heat, one that does not allow us to fear when the drought comes, one that allows us to persevere and overcome. So, back to the original question here, how do we experience this promised transformation of our hearts? How do we experience this new heart, this new script on our hearts? Let me suggest 2 ways that we experience more of this promised transformation right out of this text from this image of the 2 trees. The first is this: we need to invite God to root out the lies that have been written on our hearts. We need to invite God to root out the lies that have been written on our hearts. Invite God to search your heart and your mind. Invite Him to probe the script that's been driving your behavior, your habits, your insecurity, your anxiety, your apathy, your struggles, your success, whatever it is for you. I had to invite God to help expose, why do I always feel the need to be so driven? You can do this on your own. There is a spiritual exercise that Christians have been doing for at least 1,000 years, but it really predates that. It's called the Daily Examen. If you Google this, you'll find examples of this. There's a helpful app called Reimagining the Examen, which I would recommend to all of you. And here's the thing. This guide comes out of, it's based in Psalm 139, the last 2 verses, which reads, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting." The idea of the Daily Examen is that at the end of the day, you're going to stop, you're going to pause before God, you're going to sit in His presence, and you're going to invite Him to help you review your day through His eyes, not just through yours. You're going to specifically ask Him, like, what was I missing today? Like, why did I respond to that situation? And where did I see you? Where were you that I didn't see you? Where did I miss an opportunity to love someone? Like, what did my day say about what I most deeply desire? Did my love for God and my others grow or shrink? Like, that's how you spend the time, 10, 15 minutes a day. That's how it's usually practiced. Like I said, there's the app, Reimagining the Examen, so you can try this out for yourself. It is one of the most helpful exercises in inviting God to speak into our lives and expose the script that is written on our hearts. Having said this, inviting God to root out the lies, while you can do bits and pieces on your own, it almost always involves inviting someone else into your life. The way that God speaks into our lives is primarily through others. That other people can see things that you and I can't see about ourselves. We need other people. So this might be a counselor, a therapist, a pastor, a trusted friend, a small group leader, a spouse. It might be, and I want you to hear this, if you invite God to root out the lies in your heart, He might send to you your harshest critic, someone you do not want to hear from. But if you're inviting Him to speak into, He might even use that person to speak into your life to expose things that you couldn't see on your own. So I just want to set expectations here. If you're actively inviting God to root out the lies in your life, He will often send other people, and this might feel hurtful, but trust me in this. If you follow God, if you trust God through the pain of exposing the lies, there's freedom and there's health on the other side. So the first thing is invite God to root out our lies. And the second is this: root your deepest desires in Him. That we are to nurture our love and send our deepest desires, what we long for most in life, deep into Him. Seek God, seek the things of God. But you can ask me, you might be asking right now, like, I can't even control what I desire. I don't even know what I do desire. How do I desire God more? So let me give you an illustration, one of my favorites we've used before. Years ago, Jenny and I were invited to, we were given this luxurious gift card to a Brazilian steakhouse in Dallas. And I don't know if you know how those things work, but you get you go in and it's, they have this ridiculous salad bar, and then you get these little circle things, and one side's red, one side's green. And if it's green side up, that means they're going to come bring you meat. just like luxurious meat. They have it on these spits and they just shave it off at your table, like leg of lamb and like filet mignon wrapped in bacon, things like that. Everything you can imagine, amazingly cooked. And then red, you stop, and then green, you go. And so we were headed out there one night, and I was so excited about this. Like I was preparing for days on end. I had worked out extra hard and ate nothing but salads. I wanted to be as hungry as possible when I got there. Now, imagine if I was so hungry that on the way to this luxurious Brazilian steakhouse, I was just like, I can't take it anymore. And I pulled over to a 7-Eleven. And I ran in and I saw those hot dogs that were on those rollers that had been sitting there for like 3 weeks. I was like, I'll take 3 of those. And I wolfed down 3 of those 3-week-old hot dogs. And then I show up at the restaurant and meet my wife, and we walk in, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel hungry. I don't desire your perfectly cooked filet mignon wrapped in bacon right now. I don't know what's wrong with me. Now you, if you were my friend, you would look at me and you would say, you are an idiot. And I would be. You'd be right. How do you grow your desire for God? Stop filling your life with junk. Stop filling your life with work and hobbies and entertainment and constant noise. Stop feeding your soul the spiritual equivalent of 3-week-old hot dogs. Stop filling your mind with trashy entertainment and your house with household projects and with everything except God. So in one sense, what do you have to do to grow your desire for God? The answer is nothing. God is good. He is desirable. He is beautiful. Christ is amazing. All of our desires are designed by Him and designed for Him. He is more satisfying than any job, any project, any house, any achievement, any experience you can have, anything you can buy. If we would just stop stuffing our lives so full, our appetite for God would naturally grow. If you're a believer, if you've given your life to Christ, you have the Spirit of God in you. You will desire Him, period. And day by day, if you just create space to allow your desires to grow, your heart will be transformed. The old scripts that were written on your heart by sin will seem more and more ridiculous. They will lose their power over you, their grip over you, and more God's love. And God's love for you, your love for God, your love for others will grow more and more. You will bring your deepest desires to Him because He alone can satisfy them. And you will find trust and confidence in Him. And He will write His law on your heart, just as He promised. That's the hope of a new heart.